where I see people going wrong is it's not so much the home loan, because that's kind of your necessity, right? You need a home to live in. The different online accounts that they'll have for streaming TV or games or those sorts of things, or the temptation to just pay on Afterpay, or all those little bits and pieces. That's where the bulk of the damage just gets done, I sort of think. Credit card management, that's the costly stuff. That's the 20% per annum if you break it down versus the, I don't know, it's higher now, but let's say 6% on a home loan.
People are curious what you do to start off, and then we'll go wherever. So you do a few things, but pick a couple. And what do you...
The two primary things I do are both kind of linked. I run two different advisory businesses in the financial services space, both predominantly dealing with home loans. One is an old-fashioned, what would I call it, people business, where we've got advisors that are looking after a client base, have been for many years, trusted advisors to them. So it's sort of a low volume, high value type proposition. And the other is a digital proposition of the same thing, which is called Teller, and that is taking that journey of moving things online as much as possible, looking at different demographics and how they get a home loan.
So here's a hard question to start you with. Who would your best competitor be, or is there not one in New Zealand?
It's a hard one if you wrap tech into the mix. New Zealand's not particularly good at wrapping tech into the mix. Probably where it comes to developing proprietary tech, it's probably Squirrel, who have done quite a bit of work over the years in terms of digitising forms and bits and pieces to make that home loan journey easier. So they're the closest. Yeah.
Wow, interesting, because Squirrel, I've learnt not to publicly talk negatively of people. My only concern is the funds that are essentially mortgage funds, shall we call them. Yeah,
that's a tricky bit, right? Because when you do, and that's a problem in our industry where you do multiple things. You're a mortgage broker or you're a fund. It's, two different hats. I get it.
Yeah, you'll be more diplomatic than me. My main concern, not to, like, from what I've seen, there's been clients that have used Squirrel and they seem to have good experiences because of the automation, things like that. My concern is around the fact that it's peer-to-peer lending fund, my understanding. So you got these people that are lending money and you're investing on the expectation that these people keep paying. Yeah. And you're doing that under the expectation that interest rates were at a certain point. Mm-hmm. It's been there for a few years. Yeah. And what happens if there's scrutiny or filter to choose those people that can pay the bills? Mm-hmm. Suddenly isn't as good, or they can't pay, and then what happens to the money? That's
a real challenge. I look at all those real estate funds, if you like, that are lending lending into our building sector, and that's what they're doing. They're lending to home builders mainly. That's in times like we're in now, that becomes quite sort of problematic, and it's really easy to have the old finance company situation that we had back in the GFC over and over again. It doesn't go away, that kind of model, right?
No.
Your last dollar in is paying for the interest on the loan that you did last, sort of thing. So it requires some really good risk governance around it.
Yeah, it's an art. I won't name names now, but I saw someone advertising 10% return on a property fund. Yeah. And I was like, based on what? Yeah. Like, how can you even say that? And then there's this magical trick where property developers are essential, and I met some great ones. We had one on, Cameron Stewart. Mm-hmm. He's done like 300 odd property transactions. Yeah. He's a good dude, straight up and down. Yeah. But then you have these other property developers that maybe had good intention, but suddenly the complexity of the project leads to a loss of money. Yeah. Do you remember anything from the finance company? Because I was just finishing school, but you might have. What did it look like on the outside? Were you like, you get an extra % than the bank? And
it's I worked through all of that in banking, and it's very much of who gets really penalised in that sort of cycle? It's the person that's last in. And so there's always someone left holding something. And the GFC, it was land that they hadn't developed yet. And, so those sort of greenfield guys that had gone out and bought for that next round at the top of the cycle that got hit or whatever it might be. Cam Baggery, the economist, always said that when the music stops, you find out who's got their pants down or something like that. And it's kind of like that, isn't it? There's always going to be someone. But it comes back to, and we're getting off track probably, but it comes back to balance sheet strength at the end of the day, not cash flow.
Yeah.
As to who gets through those sorts of scenarios. And the new guys that have got no balance sheet are often, so it's the last in that are often the first out sort of thing. But yeah, I'm sure there's exceptions to that. Yeah.
Well, I think at least my journey as a financial advisor, I expect will always be a balance between people saying your returns aren't high enough compared to this new speculative thing that's come out, or why are they down, what's wrong, what's happening with my money.
Yeah.
Do you have, like, is there a similar, like, what sort of products do you do with your advisory face-to-face one? Is it's just mortgages and insurance, or?
It's any type of debt, actually. So that Business Eightfold is kind of a business that focuses on individuals. So like you may own a business, in which case we're dealing with the business debt, or we're dealing with your personal debt that's been rolled in to support the business, through to your standard sort of salaried home loan. So over the years, we've done a lot with corporates, we've done a lot with property developers, we've done a lot with just operating companies that needed debt. But we've done probably more with the actual shareholders and directors of those, and their lawyers and people around them. So it's that kind of network of individuals that sit around that. And the funny thing with Eightfold is that business was built, although it's predominantly retail in terms of home loans, the people that are in it all came out of a business lending background. So they're all corporate bankers and bits and pieces, which is quite unique because you don't generally find that. Most mortgage brokers are ex-retail bankers. So it's got that. That's why I say it's sort of low volume, high touch, because it's dealing with stuff that's probably a bit trickier. Yeah. But
so
it's debt focused, yeah.
So I'd be interested, like, I'm fascinated in people's journey and how they started things, because that's, in lack of a better word, it's kind of high net worth, high complexity, high touch, high reward.
Yeah.
How did you start earning respect in the market? You know what I mean?
I think we were lucky that we already had built it in banking. So everyone that came on that Eightfold journey came out of banking, and they'd been there a while. And when you do the right thing by people over and over again, you start to build some trust. So we were lucky to have that. And that kind of, even with a home loan advisor, they don't survive without that kind of velocity around their little network. It's sort of like you can market the heck out of it, but it's that, what's the 3 degrees thing, right? If I'm at a party with Ryan and Ryan says, and I say to him, I'm just getting a home loan, and Ryan says, you should talk to so-and-so, it happens. It's just the way it happens. Whereas if you don't have that kind of network and that kind of snowballing effect going on, it's very hard to build a business, really. Cold selling home loans is not easy.
You strike me as more of a relationship builder than a cutthroat salesperson.
Yeah. I don't think that's unique, though, is it? That's New Zealand.
Yeah. Cutthroat salespeople don't last long unless they're doing transactional sales, but even then, you can burn people pretty quick.
Yeah. And even when you're doing it online, you've still got to build trust. Yeah. So.
Well, I used to, I set off that I used to do funeral insurance, but what they used to do was they would have an ad that says, would you like to win an iPhone? And then a little tick box that says, what are you comfortable with being called about insurance if you apply for this thing?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I essentially cold calling them and then saying, hey, you know, do you care if people die? What's your plan? And it's a bit of an interesting thing to take someone that you never met on a journey.
Yeah.
And you could argue funeral insurance is useful for some people, but a lot of the time, you know, maybe not. Where do you see people go wrong in debt? You know, like putting a personal guarantee on their loan when they're a limited liability company?
No, I think where I kind of see it, where most people go wrong, it's not with debt actually. It's kind of with their overall financial management. Yeah, I guess some of it's debt. I mean, in the last 5 years, the store cards, you know, the afterpays and have been really difficult to resist for people that have got a spending desire to deal with. And so things like where I see people going wrong is it's not so much the home loan, because that's kind of your necessity, right? You need a home to live in. But it's the different online accounts that they'll have for streaming TV or games or those sorts of things, or the temptation to just pay on Afterpay, or all those little bits and pieces. That's where the bulk of the damage just gets done, I sort of think. Credit card management. That's the costly stuff, that's the 20% per annum if you break it down versus I don't know, it's higher now, but let's say 6% on a home loan.
We had sorry to interrupt there, we had a neighbour that's since gone out of business since I think it's triple CFA, I think it's called.
Yeah.
Where it was payday loans that doubled day on day.
Loan shark.
It's mad. It's like, oh yeah, it's just a couple percent a day, but then a couple percent a day over a year if you work it out.
Yeah.
And if everyone ever wants to work out the implications of not paying debt, there's the rule of 72, where you divide 72 by the interest rate that is on the loan. So let's say it's 6.
Yeah.
So in 12 years, it'll double if you don't pay it.
Yeah. Yeah. And you think about the kind of ease at which you can buy that car or couch or new clothes or whatever versus getting a home loan, and it's significantly different, right? One's scrutinized to the nth degree, and the other is no questions asked. So you can see why it sort of happens. But yeah, it's like people don't realize that the no question asked is because they're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the poor podcast guest, we did a few hundred episodes on finance. I found it incredibly boring and stopped doing that. But there will still be people gunning to hear about finance. What are your thoughts on the official cash rate increasing? So assume you're explaining it to a 5-year-old, like what the hell is official cash rate?
Yeah.
And what is the implications for the average New Zealander?
Yeah, okay. Well, the official cash rate, I kind of look at it as guidance for the banks, because the banks don't have to stay in line with it or follow it. So it's a indication from the Reserve Bank as to where they think funding costs should be to some degree. Most banks in New Zealand, they're not funded off that Reserve Bank desk, they're funded off wholesale global money. So they get their money from wherever it's cheapest, as everyone does. You're not going to fund yourself with expensive money when you can get cheaper money. And so the Reserve Bank's using that official cash rate to temper a hot market in theory. So we've got inflation, the cost of everything's been going up. They're trying to fire a shot across the bow and say we've got to stop spending. And one way of doing that is to hit you where it hits hardest, which is your biggest debt, which is your home loan. So putting the official cash rate up means that the banks, in theory, could follow and pushing up their home loan rates, and that could really sting you in the back pocket. And that difference between what you were paying in interest and what you are paying next month in interest might be the difference between you eating out at a restaurant once a week or twice a week, or buying that new car, which is all stimulating that inflationary effect. So that's what they're trying to do. The Reserve Bank's trying to do. They're trying to throw some cold water on the fire. What I think about it, well, it's like I don't get it, to be honest, because
yeah, go on, be polarizing.
Because banks, as I say, are funded off wholesale rates, and wholesale rates are coming down. We saw the official cash rate go up, when was it, earlier this year, and banks really didn't follow. They tweaked their variable rates, but nothing else. There's still a chance that after this next 50 basis points from last Wednesday that the banks will move, but we haven't seen it yet. Normally you'd see them come out pretty quickly if they were going to do something. So that kind of tells you that potentially interest rates have plateaued. And so why is the Reserve Bank trying to use that lever still to control inflation? I don't quite get that. Of course, there's other ways you can control inflation, like taking money out of circulation. So you reduce the amount of money in circulation.
They haven't been doing that.
We haven't been doing it. So
the opposite even.
Yeah.
Injecting a whole lot of
I don't quite understand it myself, and I'm not an expert on it, but it doesn't quite sort of make sense to me.
Yeah.
The other thing that crosses my mind is that banks have been really profitable because they've been able to actually put margin back in over the last year because of the rates going up. So we've had a huge run of profits, which is good for the banks, but also they've got to deal with that from a social point of view and explain why they should be so profitable. Well, it's sort of been given to them on a plate by, the OCR moving up since last year. So, that's kind of weird too, that, we've assisted them in that profit as a country through our Reserve Bank putting those rates up, and yet we slam them for being profitable.
Do you think it's okay to be profitable
as a bank?
Yeah, because that's something, the average person will be listening to this and you're like, fuck these greedy, I swear if you don't want to swear. These greedy corporates taking all our money, they profited from some of the worst things in humanity, the pandemic, and what would you say about profit?
Well, I'd say if any business owner is going to strive to maximise profit, aren't they?
Yeah.
And unless someone wants to put controls around that, then you should expect that that's what a business is going to optimise for, really.
Is there too much profit? Like, let's say pharmaceutical companies.
That's interesting too. So there's been really good profit, right?
Yeah.
But actually, the Australian banks haven't been paying out those dividends are being retained and to an extent, because what they're doing is they're building up their capital, because our Reserve Banks put capital allocation ratios up, so they've got to hold more capital. So and it's cheaper to keep that capital made locally in New Zealand rather than pay it out to shareholders and then take it back in globally, sort of thing. So getting complex, but actually even though they're profitable, a lot of that money's actually been reinvested back into their businesses to support what our Reserve Bank wants anyway. So
whether you can answer this or not, what do you think led to inflation?
I think in New Zealand's context, we've had a massive increase in wage costs, and that's probably the number one thing. I mean, how many people have you heard of that through the pandemic saved a lot of money, And it kind of doesn't make sense, but they did. They've come out better off than they were on the other side. And a lot of that's because they took pay increases through that period as well. And that means that they can afford to do things that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So that's probably the biggest impact, I think, is the cost of labour. Then you've got the supply chain issues from the pandemic, which slowed everything down, and the inefficiencies of it, such as working from home and all those sorts of things that you can wrap around it. So, it's like the pandemic to me is like the boa constrictor that swallowed the impala or whatever, and it's going to take a little bit of time to digest and go through. Yeah.
Well, you think, in essence, a Reserve Bank's job is to keep unemployment at a certain rate and inflation.
Yeah.
And now you got high inflation, but unemployment's relatively okay.
Low, yeah.
So they got to be like, well, we just got to destroy it. Like, we just got to increase the cost of money until this inflation, but that probably won't do much.
No. I mean, I don't. The reason it's so hard to understand is there's global things as well, and as a planet, we're probably peak population. So in a way, that kind of growth thing of, how you kind of have these central bank growth targets, 3% per annum or whatever it might be. I mean, how's that sustainable when your population is falling, unless you've got tech or whatever it might be to pick up that kind of gap from a declining population, then that's hard to sustain growth.
On that topic, because this is very topical. Are we overpopulated or underpopulated?
In New Zealand?
Well, just globally or in New Zealand, in the sense that, so we've got an aging demographic that's unable to be supported or funded.
Yeah.
And then there's this talk of global warming, these strong subjects. So you pick and choose. I don't mind going into the dark. So, and Elon Musk says, hey, we're actually underpopulated. Yeah. Jordan Peterson says, both controversial figures, whereas everyone else is saying, oh, we're consuming to extinction. Yeah,
well, I think in Western countries we're underpopulated, and that's where they're coming from. Like, the United States is probably could do with some growth in terms of people, and it's been quite aggressive with its immigration, so it probably recognises that. And New Zealand's the same, and Australia's the same, Canada's the same, Europe potentially is the same, although it's got a whole lot of other things that needs to kind of reinvent itself probably a little bit. But yeah, definitely if you looked at those kind of Western countries such as ours, I think we're probably underpopulated, and that's good for us because there's big populations out there that would like to live here. But
are you making enough babies? Have you got children? Are you contributing or taking away?
My children are growing up. So
I mean, you did it more than me.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot to that because, I mean, like I think about, you do the planning. Every person I plan within a few decades of me, I just assume they don't have a pension just to be safe.
Yeah.
I don't know where that money's come from.
No.
They got the super fund. Oh, yeah, they'll be gone pretty quick.
Yeah.
And you try and extend the age, but that's a huge voting populace.
Yeah. I kind of feel that we should be reinvesting more of what we save in New Zealand. I think with the whole super fund and any fund in New Zealand, actually, and you'll know this, the majority of that money is benefiting offshore corporates in terms of their growth. And so I think we need to somehow figure out how we reallocate some of that capital back into stuff that helps us. And it's a bit the same as the argument around the banks, right? The 4 Aussie banks, they've taken over New Zealand's capital markets and they're hugely profitable, but we don't see anything for it, that kind of argument. Well, the only way to change that is to redeploy some of the capital that we've got access to back into local banks or things if we want to go down that road. And I kind of feel we're missing a little bit of that boldness to do some of that creative stuff with things like the Kiwi Savers and the super schemes and bits and pieces. But
I mean, the thing, I'm for it if you can balance diversification. Like, so if you're not fundamentally putting people at risk of capital loss. But I think, there is I think a lot of New Zealanders would feel proud that part of the KiwiSaver is funding New Zealand companies, and a certain allocation of that would be appropriate.
Yeah, and it's a hard one because if you take something like Rocket Lab as an example, where they went straight offshore with capital because they knew that they'd just get people here would just think they were crazy. Should we have taken that risk as a nation up front and invested in them ourselves, or should we have just expected that the US was the right place for them to go and raise capital because it was high risk? I don't know.
Do you think there's less funds here, or there's less of a willingness to support other businesses?
I think we're just the same sort of cross-section as most Western countries when it comes to how many dollars there are per capita and all that sort of thing. Where I think we lack imagination when it comes to envisaging the future a little bit, I think.
You think so?
Yeah.
Going to explain that controversy. So New Zealanders lack...
I think it's a bit like infrastructure. Like, rather than just getting on and building it today, we'll consider it for too long, and it becomes, an albatross around our neck and a cost that is blown out because we've waited so long to make a decision on it. We're just not moving quick enough on some of that stuff. And what happens if you don't move quick enough? Then the startup goes offshore, or the opportunity goes. Someone else picks it up. So yeah,
I think this is a bit harsh, but I think it's easy here.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yep.
Just to use podcasting examples, not even just New Zealand, just in humans in general. If you do over 20 to 27 podcast episodes, you're in the top 1%, because everyone gives up before then.
Yeah.
And I think about as well as, like, there's a period of time where I was making a certain number of cold calls a day, and I'll go to other business owners and they would say to me, that's like crazy. Why are you doing that amount? I'm like, that, like, compared to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Like, I was talking to a lady, she was doing 200 to 300 cold calls a day, and I just set an expectation, I'll do 20. And that was, like, mind-blowing. Like, the work ethic and competition out there is pretty...
Yeah. Well, Elon Musk, what's his thing? He says that if you want to do twice as well as your competition, you need to do twice the hours or something like that. And it's kind of pretty much basic mathematics, really, isn't it? But in a way, there's some truth to that. And I think you're right. I mean, that's why migrants do so well in New Zealand. If you come out of Bombay or somewhere and you come into this market, it's easy.
It is.
The competition is light. People are not thinking strategically as well as they would in a very highly competitive market. All those things.
Well, it's like, as I was saying off here, I started a marketing company, but it shouldn't exist. You know what I mean? I don't think recruiters should exist either. And it's just based around the fact that a person feels uncomfortable to do the outreach.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
I do. Yeah, I do.
So what do you think is... I find leaders, they shared and develop, and I've found as I started the business how many limiting beliefs I have around self-worth and deserving of money and charging it and all these things, and failing as a leader. And what was your biggest, like, realization, whether it was hiring a weakness or it was just like, hey, I need to shed this belief system, it's not serving me?
I forget, what's the term? The self-belief is the hardest thing, I think.
Working on it.
That self-doubt is just, should I really be the one doing this? It's like with Teller, which is kind of a structural change to the industry in the long run. It took me about 4 years to kind of pluck up the courage with it, really, because I kept thinking someone else was going to do it. And it's like, so that sort of... believing in your own idea and what could be, coming back to what I was saying earlier about us envisaging the future and what we could do with it in terms of New Zealand, that's the hardest bit, and having the guts to actually try and do it. And when you do try and do it, and I mean, it's that old cliche tall poppy thing in New Zealand, but when you do try and do it, people kind of look at you like you're crazy. Which is a very New Zealand thing. What do you mean you're going to build rockets and send satellites up into New Zealand from New Zealand?
Yeah.
It's like you're crazy. And it's the same thing with we've got this mission to develop an industry where instant home loans are possible. And you say that to most people in the industry and they'll think you're crazy. You can't get a home loan instantly. Well, why not? In this day and age, we've got AI, we've got great tech tools, we've got... New Zealand's actually quite blessed with the tech industry and the people in it and what we can build. So there's nothing really to stop us apart from us going, no, you can't do it, you're crazy. So why not do it, you know?
Yeah, well, why not? Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an application form that's assessed.
Yeah.
And as long as you got clean data, that would be the art. How do you get them to input correct information?
And those are the challenges. But, I mean, you have all those problems in a human world.
Yeah.
So that's no different, really.
True. It's like I can't really tell if someone's lying to me. I like to think I can. But
yeah.
What's the difference?
Yeah. And there's a whole lot of proof points that you look at and bits and pieces. And
how far away are you? Or who's holding you up?
Who's holding us up? I would say it's the banks, but they are starting to come along on the journey, is what I would say. So, banks, especially in New Zealand, we've got these 4 massive banks, they are not an easy ship to turn. And they don't really need to turn, to be honest. They don't need to change. But I think they know they have to. And they've got teams and people working on that stuff. But, for us as the small guy, we've got to kind of look at it more as us taking them along on the journey with us and to help them in a way to achieve that. We can't try and fight them on it.
No, it's an art. I was, it hasn't gone live yet. Or would have gone live now, actually, if people listeners. Quantum is the name of the company, and they make robots that do human jobs. And they're essentially doing one for compliance, where for a finance company, they're creating a compliance officer that's a robot that can assess the quality of the advice and if it's done appropriately. Yeah. And the biggest challenge is communicating this to their prospects. And they would have large corporates and stuff like that. Yeah. And they're trying to find the people in the organization that would act as the catalyst to move things.
Yeah.
How do you encourage change, or how did you sell to yourself like, hey, I'm going to try this thing? You know what I mean? Because change is, people call themselves change management. Yeah,
I think one of the things in our industry is that the industry is a bit scared of the regulator, but we've got really good regulators in New Zealand. They're very proactive, and over the last 5 years, they've actively worked towards the industry going digital. And when I started seeing that, I started getting more confident that it was the right thing to start looking at, because actually, when you think about things like compliance as an example, it's much easier to do that well when you've got the right tools. And digital is like fantastic at tackling things like those sort of menial tasks that you might do to ensure that you're capturing the compliance that you're doing. It's kind of, to me, I wouldn't have done it without regulation increasing, but supportive regulation, and the need to streamline what advisors were doing. So that is ahead of the customer. It sounds really weird, but I could see that from an industry point of view, that kind of engine room, the back office bit, needed good tech. So if you get that right and you give that on to the customers, then the experience is great. But if they're dealing with kind of manual processes around things, then that customer journey is always going to be awful. So you're going to have to kind of address the tools that the industry need to get the customer journey down the stream right, if that makes sense. Is that kind of logical?
Well, for people that might not be in the space, like they're like, what do you mean? Why not customer first? But if you deal with the Financial Markets Authority, like, to give people an example, so there's anti-money laundering is quite a common one that is the vein of existence for some people.
Yeah.
And it's coming from international to New Zealand, and we were a bit behind the 8 ball.
Yep.
An example for me is we had a trust that we found out later had a trustee that wasn't really practicing a part of it, all these waste of time trusts.
Yeah.
And we needed signatures so they could withdraw their money in order to buy a house. And he was on a boat.
Yeah.
So I was contemplating driving 4 hours to get jumping on the boat to get him signed because he couldn't print anything.
Yeah.
And for people who are curious what that is, essentially it's like we need to track how the money is getting to where it is, and we have to have people that are involved so that there's accountability, and that because it could lead to funding of terrorism, different things.
Yeah.
So the fact, like you and a few others are like standing alone with your head out of the...
Yeah, and that's a great... I mean, the AML thing isn't so much my area, but that's a great example. Like you've got people flying around the world to sign paper documents when you could be doing things with tech online and knowing just as well that was the person that was the real person and that you were, I've just got back from Singapore, and the Singapore government's put a system in place that kind of deals with AML centrally. And so everything is online. There's no paper. You open a bank account, you just give them a number, which is your ID number, and all the rest is done,
That would be good.
So, and that's kind of that envisaging the future. That's how I see New Zealand's so small, 5 million people, same as Singapore. We've got good education systems. We've got great tech skills coming out the back of that. So we've got access to developers and great designers and all those things. We now need to start actually trying to outperform the rest of the world in how we do some of the functionality of what we do locally. And I think we were ahead in, there's been examples in the past of us being leaders in this stuff, and we've kind of let it slip a bit. But I don't think it would take us much to pick it back up again. It needs a few things. It needs government and academia and everyone to actually be functional.
Yeah.
And that's not in the private sector. And that's not always easy. But if you get it right and you do something like we did with FPOS in the 80s, where everyone started using a plastic card and we hardly dealt with money, it's transformational, and that's kind of what we need to be looking at, I think, in New Zealand, is what can speed things up, make things quicker and more efficient. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. It's like we're not short on talent, and we're not short on the ability to be malleable given our size.
And we're creative.
Yeah, Kiwi ingenuity.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to say positive things as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say, what is the most remarkable thing about what you created? You know what I mean? Like the back end of it, what makes it different from like an application? You know what I mean?
Yeah. For me, it's kind of what can be built on top of it more than anything. So once you create something that's bespoke to an industry, then and you own that tech, then the ability to do the instant loan, because you've got the data at hand and you can do the analytics around it and all those bits and pieces, that's the exciting bit. So what you can actually do with having that functional sort of ecosystem in place, that's what excites me. So integrations so for us with Teller, we see ourselves as kind of the tech at the heart of the industry when it comes to that home loan advice piece, and we've got the industry plugged into it. So we've got advisors coming through it. We've got the end-to-end digital going through it. We've potentially got real estate using it for certain things. We've got the credit agencies feeding into it. We've got property data businesses feeding into it. And all our suppliers are linked into it in terms of being able to essentially take a loan off it. Then we've got a true marketplace, and that's really where it gets exciting, is that you become the centre of things and everyone is around you.
Rainmaker.
Yeah. You have some ability to tie things together that others don't, because you have that that junction, that crossroads that you're sitting in the middle. So
I'm glad I asked that because, I see it. I'm like, oh, this is a user-friendly application form with very little headache.
Yeah.
That's what I saw.
Yeah.
But the back-end marketplace, so the loan comes through.
Yeah.
And then people are fighting to get the loan, or?
Well, not at the moment. No,
that's the goal. Yeah, okay.
But that's where it could get to.
Interesting.
And in fact, we're about to launch a comparisons element to our site in the next few months where you'll actually start to see what your repayments would look like lined up against rates. So that you're starting to get much more of a kind of a marketplace feel to what things look like. So do I go with ANZ or do I go with ASB? And if you've got those sort of A-B comparisons where you can look at what that means in terms of your fortnightly repayment or whatever it might be, then it gives you the start of a thinking process around which way you want to go. What ends up being negotiated is often quite different, but it's about kind of empowering the customer and giving them as many tools as possible to help them with making decisions. Yeah.
So where do you plan to monetize it? Like, where would is it a commission from the bank? Is it a relationship with the advisor that pays for the access to that?
Both, actually. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Good guess. Okay.
Yeah, so there's kind of two sides to it, but it's a bit of all of those. And it's a journey. So, I'm buying my first home. And, when you're buying a first home, there's that thing of, okay, I need to line up my home and contents insurance. I need to think about mortgage protection or income insurances. Potentially I need to get my power on, my internet sorted, all those other bits and pieces. And so when you're in a digital marketplace, you can actually start to incorporate some of those things into that process. And, we haven't done a lot of those yet, but for instance, we've done a piece around the conveyancing of the title, which you need a solicitor to do. And, everyone goes through that process with their first home of, I haven't got a solicitor. And what we've done is created a panel where you just say you'd like to use our panel, and we have set prices that are already configured for the task. So you know exactly what you're going to pay, and you don't have to worry about it at all. It just all gets arranged for you. So it's something very little, but it kind of means a lot to someone that's not done something before.
Yeah.
They don't have to go and ask mum and dad, have you got a solicitor I can use? Or, it takes all that away. So our goal is to kind of keep working on that friction, get rid of the friction out of the process, streamline it as much as possible.
I could see, just from my limited understanding of you, is building relationships with those key partners that would have access to a lot of those clients and monetizing that. Yeah. The challenge, I imagine, is apart from you providing an incredible product that people tell others about, how do you appeal to the market? You know what I mean? How do you get consumers coming to you? Because that's the marketplace.
Yeah. Well, I think we're very focused on a younger demographic because we're online, and the way I kind of describe it to a lot of people is that when we launched, a lot of first home buyers probably thought that you could just go online and do everything online and get a home loan, right? Because you can with everything else. So they weren't aware necessarily that you had to go to a bank or find a broker or whatever it might be to get a home loan. So the first thing they'll do is go to Google and search for how do I get a home loan, or get a home loan online, or whatever it might be. And so that's a marketplace where we want to be number one in. And we realise that that's kind of early adopters at the moment, because a lot of people do know that you go to the bank, or that you ask your mum and dad who their broker is and you use them, or whatever it might be. So that's a long game. We know that we're dealing with the kind of early adopters in that space. The other bit of the marketplace is all about partnerships, really. So it's us using other really strong brands and trusted brands as our partners to drive business for us. And so, we're focused on media and real estate and, brands that align to us that could be good partners in terms of age and stage, So, moving house kind of aligns nicely to food-related things. Do I sign up with HelloFresh or My Food Bag or something like that? So those sorts of partners actually, who you might not think would be good, actually could work quite well with us, because they're looking for who's moving into the new house that's been built, because they want to actually deal with them as a client, right? So those sorts of things, which are not traditional to our industry.
No, I never would have thought of it.
Yeah.
So on that, how many, like, over your time, give or take, like, would you say, like, how many partnerships might you have developed? Or
at the moment we've only less than half a dozen. Yeah. So it's early days for us. Yeah.
Because I was going to ask you how to develop a partnership.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the first question.
Yeah.
But like, do you have like a value add? Do you think about that?
Yeah, we do. So what, take real estate, for example. A real estate agent is working on behalf of the person selling the house, but they've got to find a buyer to buy it. And, I kind of look at that as a really good example, because traditionally what happens is someone starts house hunting before they actually start thinking about finance. And often they've got emotionally attached to a property before they've even talked to a bank about it. And then they miss out on the auction because they didn't have their ducks in a row in terms of finance, and someone else did. And so that's the sort of thing that we're looking at, is if we've got a relationship with an agent or an agency who's selling a property, where they can be saying, Teller is going to make sure that you get that order of things right when it comes to getting your finance sorted, then they're more likely to win as a buyer, and the agent's more likely to get an outcome. And in kind of markets like we're in, where every agent out there is wanting to perfect the art of sales, because they're suddenly back in that mindset after a really hot market where everything was just so easy, that's important. And so affordability, what can I afford to buy? Am I looking in the right price range? Am I going to be able to get finance for that? All those sorts of things become really important. And so that's where we look at our partnership proposals, and we're working on something at the moment where we're putting affordability calculators onto listings, and most listings out there at the moment have repayment calculators, which helps you understand what your monthly repayment might look like if you bought that house.
That's interesting.
But can you actually afford to buy it? That's the first question you need to ask. So it's making sure that the right tools are there at the right time, and that process is aligned. So, the finance is aligned to the sales process or whatever it might be, things like that.
I think that's a tough sell, even though it makes complete sense. You know what I mean? Like, I put real estate agents and insurance brokers as the same kind of people. How do I incentivize those financially? Because they might have the mental acuity to understand, hey, this is going to help me make more money. But I find if you give them the money.
Yeah, well, the thing is with real estate agents is they make very good money out of what they do. It's getting the sale that's the key.
Especially now.
Especially at the moment, yeah.
So you're finding there's good uptake with that? Or what
it's
are they?
Just starting, but it's been very good so far, yeah. We've had a lot of interest, so...
Okay.
Yeah, I think it'll grow.
And you're not even incentivizing? They're not like, if you get this, we'll give you a finder's fee or whatever?
With some of our partnerships we are, but we have a marketing fee essentially, but not at this stage with the real estate guys.
Yeah, and they're using it? Early stages.
Early stages, yeah. I'll tell you in 6 months.
Because it makes sense to me. Like, throw them a link. Hey, you can't afford... Well, here.
Yeah.
Boom.
It's essentially giving a value add to your vendors too, the people that are selling, because you're actually giving them a website present. So it's got something that additional tool to get that sale done. So
if you were doing that to like financial planners, I'd be like, oh
yeah,
the farmers, not the hunters.
Yeah,
that's all. We'll see.
Yeah, Yeah.
Because I wonder, that's interesting.
There's this big movement offshore, and you might have heard a bit about it, around embedded finance. So, and you've seen it in the share market for years with stock pickers and bits and pieces being put into third-party websites. And in a way, that's kind of what we're doing, but we're doing it for that home loan world. So,
well, the thing is, if you're the oracle of truth, if you're the market that everyone goes to, that, as I say, that outreach thing is hard. And if you're the person, like, I think, and if I was a real estate agent and I was going to market it, you could just take over, in the sense that people aren't buying a house, they're buying an environment that they feel comfortable to raise themselves or their family.
Yeah.
So what you're selling is an area.
Yeah. And that's really interesting in its own right, because we're doing some work around, well, stepping back a bit, one of the big things that we find in the loan world is that it's really easy to get someone pre-approved for their first home, but them making a call on what home they buy is a really big sell process in a way. And it's changing. Like, it's a lot harder for millennials and younger people than it was for those above to make a call on what property to buy. There's things like, I've heard all these things about cladding and issues with leaky homes and all these bits and pieces, and so who do I need to talk to make sure that I'm buying something that's right, and is it the right area for my kids, are the schools good, and that whole piece, I think, is changing, and it's something that we're looking at, is that the property matching kind of side of things, where our real estate industry is very good at the people bit, like the old-fashioned advice world. It's very good at putting a listing up, but it's not so good at matching the individual to the potential property. And so, that's something for the future, but something that we see as being a kind of a next natural step, is to speed up that process of getting people into homes, which is tied to the finance, because we can't finalise the finance if you haven't got a home. We need to look at how we do that in a better way. And you're right, it's like there's the home, but then there's the area, the schools, the shops, the cafes and restaurants, all those other things that are important to making that decision about which house to buy, right?
Yeah, that's quite interesting what you're saying around if you can save people time and create personalization, I think that's where you make money. And if you had some way of categorizing an individual, whether they're setting an expectation of types of places they live, atmospheres or ratings of schools or whatever, and then that feeds out recommendations and saves them having to search.
Yeah.
There's merit.
Well, it's like travel. We used to go to a travel agent, but now we go to Expedia or somewhere online. Yeah. And we get served. Yeah. And we get served based on our preferences from the past, what we did, in the past, and all sorts of things that make a big picture in terms of an algorithm that's sitting on a platform like Expedia or whatever it might be, in terms of what they're serving up to us. So I think it's very similar, really. It's
makes sense. Makes sense to me. I mean, and then you could even have some sort of like way of getting in the house without actually being at the house. Yep.
And that's already there. There's lots of those sort of 3D tours and bits and pieces. And
I think what I was saying about the shaking out the real estate industry would be, if I was to market it, let's say I'm the king of Kohimarama, and that's the objective. I'm just going to dominate that suburb. Yep. I just go around interviewing all the shopkeepers, the principals of the school, all the people in there, and getting them to host these different things because it's in their best interest to do it. Yeah. And getting those clips and content to target people that are interested in buying houses. Yeah. But they all just think transactionally. Yeah. But I think that's been done more and more by the actual developers. You're seeing them, selling Hobsonville, even though they're just one development in Hobsonville. These are the schools, and this is the ferry, and this is the whatever it is, Good George Bar, and so that is kind of happening in the sales pitch of the actual developers. But I don't think you're right, it's not
they're at the industry level when it comes to.
They're a tough intermediary, man.
Yeah.
Because we always look at that like, oh, okay, what about business brokers? Greg's tried for 20 years to build relationships with business brokers. Oh, yeah, when you sell the business, they want something to do with the money.
Yeah.
But if you can't financially incentivize a hunter.
That's right. Yeah.
It's an art.
That's right. Yeah.
So just on that, like in terms of selling the suburb, and we've done 50 odd minutes, so you're almost finished, home stretch. So let's hypothetically say you're selling the experience of buying a house. You're selling the surroundings. You're not just selling the transaction. What do you think you sell with Teller?
We get you into it. We unlock the finance that allows you to do the transaction. So it is kind of like we're selling the dream home in a way. But also we want it to be a linear sort of process. We don't want you to get your heart broken because you miss out on the house that you really wanted because you didn't have the pre-approval in place, in time to go to the auction or whatever it might be. So it is kind of about being a safety blanket or a security blanket that sits around them and make sure that they get what they want. It's more than finding them. It's the dream home, not the
Interesting.
It's funny though, because it's like, especially with first home buyers, they're often going after the dream home when they should just be buying a first home. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like just get into the market, get yourself a home and work on the dream home.
Yeah, Greg was like, get a job, get a better job.
Yeah. So there's also sort of setting expectations in there. And, with first home buyers, the biggest bit of advice is around affordability. What can I actually afford to borrow, and where does that put me in terms of what I could buy?
The reason I asked that question is there's a guy, Russell Brunson. He's like he owns ClickFunnels. It's like he talks about in one of his books, Expert Secrets, he talks about you're not selling what you're selling. You're trying to break the belief system that they have.
Yeah.
So
right. Yeah.
Yeah, you agree?
Yeah.
What belief system do you think you have to break? And how do you do it?
Well, I mean, I don't know if it's quite that way around, but it's like, we're not. It's the old Coke thing. We're not selling a brown or black liquid. We're selling a dream. Like it's how you're going to feel when you have that Coke, and it's the same with most things, right? So it's the dream for the first home buyer has actually been in that home. It's like imagining yourself actually living in it or raising a family in it or whatever it might be. That's what we're selling. We've got all these other things like a nice application, like you said, but that doesn't really sell, right? Whereas imagining yourself in the home, that does sell.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that's kind of what we're all about,
Sell the dream.
Yeah.
And final question as we wrap this up. What drives you? Why are you doing this? You're like, oh, yeah, I just want to have instant loans, but that's not very let's get on that school bus. Where are you going?
Yeah, I think it's there's kind of this thing around, for me, we can do it. We've got everything we need now to be able to achieve that kind of instant loan, if you like. And wouldn't it be amazing? Like if I could go in tonight and just do all my stuff online and get an instant result, yes, you can borrow this amount. I mean, that would just be such a breath of fresh air over that what I do now, where I'd ring my bank manager or book a mobile mortgage manager or try and track down a broker and book a time for next week with them. And then we go backwards and forwards with documents, and there's a better way, and it's like I've been as frustrated as anyone over the years with that, and I'm in the industry. So that's what drives me. It's like when you can clearly see there's a much more efficient, more effective way of doing it online. I could have better advice through that process. access to people when I need it, access to do my own thing when I want to do my own thing. Just that's what drives me. It's like, it's to me, it's like we're years behind, and we should catch up and overtake the rest of the world on this stuff.
I said last question, but I don't think I quite got where, because in essence you're motivated by the frustration that you experience, so others don't have to go through that.
Yeah.
But then there's also the like putting New Zealand on the map and having us like let's say you're on your deathbed, you're 80 now. Hopefully you get older than that.
Yeah.
What would you be most proud of if you achieve something? Not so much instant loan or
I'd be really proud to have our technology in 12 countries, for instance. That'd be amazing. That's like because at the end of the day, New Zealand's pretty cool, and it's a great place to test and trial things. But from a commercial sense, you're going to want to go beyond it. It's a pretty quick journey to break New Zealand, and you want to go into Aussie or, in our case, our banking systems are so similar to those old English banking systems. So Australia, Canada, the UK, Singapore, Malaysia, all those places that are really like for like in terms of a home loan. It'd be awesome to be able to see our technology rolled out through them.
Okay, so you found your thing. You're on your journey.
Yeah.
It's just an adventure.
Yeah.
All right, well, people that want to experience that dream, where are they going?
They can go on to teller.co.nz.
Easy.
Teller with an E, so TELLE.
Cool. Well, I'll put in the description if there's advisors, brokers, if the bank's listening to this.
Yeah, I love talking to advisors. And we've had a lot of them looking at our technology. So, feel free to email me even if you're an advisor. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Easy. Thanks for coming on.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Ryan. It's been great.
No worries.